Have you ever felt like the road ahead of you wasn't just a path, but a trap? This is the story of my encounter with something I could never explain. My name is Daniel Hughes, and I've been a lorry driver for over 2 decades. I've travelled nearly every motorway and back road in the United Kingdom, braving storms, snowfalls, and nights so pitch black they seemed to swallow the headlights of my truck. But nothing prepared me for what happened that night on the A75, one of Scotland's most remote roads. It was a routine trip, like so many others. I was hauling a load of industrial parts from Dumfries to Stranraer, a route I know like the back of my hand. The A75 is known for being quiet, almost deserted in some stretches, especially in the dead of night. It's the sort of place where you can drive for hours without passing another vehicle, surrounded only by open fields and silent hills. But that night was different. That night changed everything. It was around 2 a.m. when I noticed something strange. A thick mist was hanging over the road, something unusual for that time of year. At first, I thought it was just a sudden change in weather, but something about it felt off. The mist seemed alive. It moved in an erratic way, as if being drawn by some invisible force. My gut told me to stop, but I knew there wasn't a lay-by or safe spot for miles. So I kept driving, trying to stay calm. And then I saw it. About 100 meters ahead, in the middle of the road, there was a humanoid figure engulfed in flames. But these weren't ordinary flames. They were intense, almost hypnotic. Yet they gave off no heat and didn't light up the ground around them. It was as if the figure was made of pure light, yet somehow solid. It stood motionless as though waiting for me. I hit the brakes, convinced someone was in danger. Perhaps it was a car accident, someone trapped in a burning vehicle. But when I stopped the lorry and stepped out, there was nothing there. No smoke, no smell of burning, nothing. Just the oppressive silence of that deserted road. I climbed back into the cab, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by fatigue. But then it reappeared. This time it was closer, maybe 30 meters from my truck. It didn't walk, it simply appeared in a different spot on the road. Its form was distorted, as if made of shadows and fire simultaneously. I tried to start the engine to get out of there, but it wouldn't respond. The entire dashboard was dead, as if all the power had been drained. I knew I had to leave. I grabbed my torch and decided to walk towards the next lit section of the road, thinking I might find help somewhere busier. But as I took a few steps, I felt a presence behind me. I spun around quickly, but there was no one there. Just that flaming figure, now only a few meters away. Its eyes, or what I assumed were eyes, glowed like smoldering embers. It had no face, just a fiery mask that seemed to stare directly at me. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Then it began to move. Not like a person walking, but gliding over the ground, leaving trails of ash that vanished instantly. Scrambled back into the lorry, locking all the doors. It stopped just a few meters away, as if studying me. For a moment, I thought it might leave, but then it raised a flaming arm and pointed directly at me. It felt as though something deep inside me had been touched by that gesture. My mind was suddenly flooded with fragmented images. Car crashes, people screaming, vehicles ablaze. It was like watching memories that weren't mine. After what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes. The lorry's engine roared back to life. I don't know how, but I managed to start it and sped away as fast as I could. I drove for miles without looking back until I finally reached a petrol station in a nearby village. I stopped to catch my breath, but something still didn't feel right. When I looked at the passenger seat, I froze. There were burnt handprints on the leather, as though someone had been sitting there. I touched them, and they were cold, as if they'd been there for a long time. Later, when I researched the A75, I discovered that stretch of road is notorious for sightings of flaming figures. Some say it's the spirit of victims from past accidents. Others believe it's something older, something that's always been there, waiting. I've never gone back to that road. If you've ever driven the A75 and felt like you weren't alone, perhaps you've crossed paths with the same man of flames. Or maybe he's chosen you. My name is Peter Lawson, and I've been a delivery driver for over a decade. I mainly work on the motorways of the United Kingdom, transporting goods between cities. I've seen plenty of strange things on these roads at night, but nothing compares to what happened to me on the M6, on a stretch known for its dark and haunting stories. It was a rainy autumn night. I was making an overnight delivery from Birmingham to Manchester, something I'd done countless times. The M6 can be a dull road, but that particular stretch always made me uneasy. There's something about the area that just feels wrong. Maybe it's the sudden thick fog that appears out of nowhere, or the twisted trees that seem to watch you as you pass. But on that night, the usual discomfort turned into pure terror. I was driving through the torrential rain, trying to keep my headlights focused on the slippery road. The radio was off. I don't like music when I'm driving at night. I prefer the sound of the road and the steady hum of the engine. That's when I saw her. On the hard shoulder, soaked by the rain, there was a woman dressed in old-fashioned clothing, like something out of a period drama. She was walking slowly, staring at the ground, her arms hanging limply by her sides. She looked lost, maybe even hurt. My first instinct was to stop and help her. No matter how tired I am, I can't ignore someone in distress. I pulled the lorry over to the side, switched on the hazard lights, and got out to see if she needed help. As I approached, I noticed something strange. Her clothes were completely drenched, but they didn't look wet in the usual way. It was as if they were made of a material that absorbed the rain but didn't reflect it. And then I saw her face. Eyes were swollen and red, with thick tears streaming down her cheeks. But these tears, they were blood. Not a thin trickle like you'd see in films, but a steady flow, as if all the sorrow in the world was pouring out of her eyes. I froze. My mind screamed at me to run back to the lorry, but my body wouldn't respond. She slowly lifted her head and looked at me. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. Then, without warning, she began walking towards me. I bolted back to the lorry, slamming the doors shut and locking them as soon as I got inside. She kept coming, closer and closer, until she finally stopped right next to the vehicle. Her muddy, blood-stained hands pressed against the passenger side window. She tilted her head to the side, as if she were trying to figure something out. Tried to start the engine, but it wouldn't respond. I pressed the ignition button over and over, but nothing happened. The only thing working was the dashboard lights, flickering erratically. I glanced at the rearview mirror and saw that she was still there. pressing her hands against the glass hard enough to leave bloody smears. Then something even stranger happened. The air inside the lorry grew heavy, as though the atmosphere itself was changing. A deep chill crawled down my spine, despite the heater being on. And that's when I heard it. A whispering voice, barely audible, began to echo inside the cab. It wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from within the lorry itself. It was a repetitive murmur, saying the same name over and over. Elizabeth. Elizabeth! I looked again at the woman outside. She was no longer pressing against the glass. Instead, she stood there with her arms hanging by her sides, murmuring something I couldn't make out. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the engine finally roared to life. I flashed the headlights and honked the horn, hoping to scare her off. She simply vanished, as if she'd never been there. I sped away, driving as fast as I could until I found a petrol station in Stafford. When I stopped to catch my breath, I noticed something deeply unsettling. On the passenger seat, there was a pool of fresh blood. I touched it, and it was warm, as though someone had just been sitting there. But the most chilling thing was what I found beside the seat. A crumpled piece of paper with a single name written on it, Elizabeth. I went home that night, unable to sleep. I spent hours researching the stretch of the M6 where it all happened. I discovered that decades ago, a young woman named Elizabeth had been found dead in that very spot. She'd been hit by a drunk driver who fled the scene without stopping to help. Witnesses reported seeing a weeping woman by the roadside in the weeks following the accident, but no one knew who she was. Since then, there have been countless reports, from drivers who claim to have seen a woman crying blood on that part of the motorway. Some say she's searching for the driver who killed her. Others believe she's trapped there, unable to move on. I've never gone back to that stretch of the M6. Whenever I have deliveries to Manchester, I take alternative routes, even if it means driving for hours longer. But sometimes when I'm driving on other roads at night, I catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A female figure, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, standing on the roadside. Whenever it happens, I put my foot down on the accelerator, convincing myself it's just my imagination. But deep down, I know she's still out there, waiting for someone who can finally help her. Or maybe she's waiting for me. My name is James O'Connor, and I've been a trucker for over 25 years. I have already travelled virtually all the UK highways, facing storms, snowfalls, and nights so dark that they seemed to swallow to the headlights of my truck. But nothing prepared me for what happened that night in the A1M parking lot near Newcastle. It was a routine trip, like so many others. I was taking a load of industrial goods from Edinburgh to London, and it was over 2 a.m. when I decided to stop to rest. I chose a parking lot next to A1M, a common place for truckers who need a few hours of sleep before continuing the journey. It was a quiet place, surrounded by tall and dense trees, but something in that place made me uncomfortable from the beginning. I parked my truck in a distant spot, away from other vehicles. There were not many people there at that time, only a few trucks scattered throughout the parking lot. After adjusting the alarm and locking the doors, I dropped the lights and prepared to sleep. That's when I heard a sharp sound, almost imperceptible, like claws scratching metal. It seemed to come from outside the truck, but when I looked out the window, there was nothing there. I thought maybe it was the wind or some small animal, so I tried to ignore. But the sound continued. He was louder and more insistent every minute, as if something was trying to enter. I took my flashlight and carefully opened the driver's door, illuminating the side of the truck. There was nothing visible, just the cold shine of the moonlight, reflecting in the puddles on the floor. I returned into the cabin, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination. But then I heard again, this time closer. It was as if something was climbing the side of the vehicle, scratching the bodywork with sharp nails. My heart began to accelerate. I decided to leave the truck to investigate. Perhaps it was some attached animal or something mechanical loose in the vehicle. But as soon as I went down, I felt a presence behind me. I turned quickly, but there was no one. Only dense darkness between the trees around the parking lot. So I saw her. At the limit of the light of the headlights of my truck, there was a slender and tall figure much higher than any normal human being. His skin was grey and shone slightly under the weak light, as if it were made of something that did not belong to this world. His eyes were red, shining like incandescent embers, and his mouth was too wide to be human, as if he were permanently open in a grotesque smile. I froze. My mind screamed to run, but my body didn't answer. The creature tilted her head to the side as if she was studying me. Then she disappeared. It simply disappeared in the darkness, as if it had never been there. I went back to the truck, shaking, and locked all the doors. I tried to turn on the engine to leave, but it didn't answer. The entire panel was erased, as if all the energy had been sucked. As I desperately tried to make the engine work, I noticed something strange on the passenger window glass. He began to blur, as if someone was breathing outside. But there was no one there. I touched the glass and felt it was cold, much colder than it should be. So I heard that breath. He was heavy and irregular, as if something huge were trying to control his own pace. I looked at the rearview mirror and saw those same red eyes, shining in the darkness right by the window. I tried to keep calm, but I knew that was not normal. That thing was there, waiting. And then, without warning, she appeared again. This time, it was so close that I could see details that I preferred to have ignored. His hands were long and thin, with sharp claws that seemed to be able to cut metal. Her mouth moved slowly, as if she was muttering something I couldn't understand. Grabbed an iron bar I kept in the truck for emergencies and hit the glass, trying to push it away. But she didn't move. Instead, he leaned his head to the side again, as if he was having fun with my fear. After what they looked like hours, but it was probably just minutes, the engine finally started. I flashed the headlights and honked, hoping to scare her. She disappeared again, but I knew it was still there, hidden in the shadows. I left driving as fast as I could until I found a busier area. When I passed another trucker in the middle of the road, I honked to get your attention. He stopped and asked if I needed help. I told what had happened, but he just shook his head as if he already knew. This area is known for strange things, he said. Many drivers report seeing slender and sinister figures in parking along A1, BM. Some say they are ancient spirits. Others believe they are creatures that came from elsewhere. He advised me to avoid that stretch of the road at night, especially the isolated parking lots. Since then, I never stopped there. When I got home, I noticed something disturbing on my truck. There were deep brands in the bodywork, as if something with sharp claws had scratched the metal. The marks formed a strange pattern, almost like old runes. I touched them, and they were cold, as if they had been made a long time ago. Later, I researched the parking lot where it all happened. I found that this place was known as reports of drivers who claimed to have seen slender and sinister creatures. Some said they were spirits of ancient travelers. Others believed they were manifestations of something older and dark. Since then, whenever I drive at night, I feel that I am being observed. Sometimes I see something from the corner of my eye. A slim and grey figure stopped in the shadows. Have you ever felt that you are being followed by something that should not exist? Something that cannot be explained, but insists on persecuting you? My name is Richard Carter, and I have been a trucker for almost 2 decades. I have already travelled virtually all the UK highways, facing storms, snowfalls, and nights so dark that they seemed to swallow to the headlights of my truck. But nothing prepared me for what happened that night at B322, a winding and isolated road in the heart of Devon. It was a routine trip like so many others. I was taking a load of industrial Exeter materials to Plymouth, a path I know well. B322 is known for its natural beauty, surrounded by green hills and dense forests, but also for its dark stories. Many local drivers avoid that road at night, saying that it keeps secrets that no one should witness. That night, I would find out why. It was around 11 a.m. when I noticed something strange in the rearview mirror. There was an old black pickup truck following me at a constant distance. At first, I thought it was just another driver trying to reach his destination. But there was something wrong with that vehicle. His lights were turned off, and he seemed to be moving irregularly, as if floating on the road. I tried to ignore, thinking that maybe it was just my tired mind preaching pieces. But then something even weaker happened. The truck began to blink their headlights, even if they were erased. It was like trying to get my attention. I decided to touch a safe stretch to let it pass. I stopped the truck on the shoulder and waited. The truck also stopped, maintaining a safe distance. When I finally decided to go out to see what was going on, it simply disappeared. There were no engine or tires on the asphalt. It was as if it had never been there. I went back to the truck, trying to convince myself that it had been just an illusion caused by tiredness. But then, as soon as I turned on the engine, it reappeared. This time, it was even closer, almost glued to the back of my truck. I started driving faster, trying to distance myself from that thing. But no matter how fast I was, she was always there, following me. It was as if he was stuck in some kind of nightmare he couldn't wake up. With every curve I made, the truck appeared again, always closer. Their headlights were now lit, but they emitted a weak and yellowish light, as if they were old and rusty. The sound of the engine was severe and irregular, as if something inside it was about to explode. I decided to take a secondary road, thinking that it might be able to unravel it. But as soon as I entered that narrow trail, I realized that I had made a mistake. The truck followed me without hesitation, as if I knew exactly where I was going. It was then that I noticed something even more disturbing. In the rearview mirror, I could clearly see the inside of the truck. There was a dark figure on the wheel, but it was not possible to distinguish his face. It was as if it were made of black smoke, always changing shape. That vision froze me to the bones. My hands trembled on the wheel, and my heart beat so hard that it seemed to want to get out of my chest. I tried to focus on the road, but it was impossible to ignore that presence behind me. While driving, I started to notice even more scary details. The truck seemed to be approaching slowly, as if playing with me. In a moment, she was just a few feet away, and the other disappeared completely, just to reappear a few seconds later, even closer. I knew I needed to find help. I decided to look for a safe place, any place where I could stop and ask for help. But the more I drove, the more isolated the road seemed to be. The trees around seemed to close on me, as if they were pushing me further from civilization. It was then that I saw something that made me completely lose control. In the rearview mirror, the dark figure on the steering wheel tilted his head to the side as if studying me. And then she smiled. It was not a human smile. It was something grotesque, with sharp teeth and eyes that shone like incandescent embers. That vision took me completely from me. I stepped deep into the throttle, trying to create some distance between us. But the truck kept chasing me, as if he was having fun with my fear. After driving for a panic, I finally found an open area with some distant houses. I thought maybe I could ask for help there. I leaned the truck and ran toward one of the houses. I knocked on the door frantically, begging for help. An elderly man answered with wide eyes of concern. "Did you see the black truck?" I asked, panting. He shook his head slowly, as if he already knew what I was talking about. "You shouldn't have come here at night," he said. "That pickup truck. She takes those who see." Before I could ask more, I heard the unmistakable sound of the truck engine approaching. I looked back and Vi stopped at the entrance of the property. With the headlights faded again, the dark figure on the steering wheel tilted his head to the side as if studying me. The elderly man pulled me into the house and locked the door. "You need to wait until dawn," he said. "That thing doesn't like sunlight." We spent hours sitting in the room in silence as the truck remained out there. There was no sound, no movement. It was like watching us, waiting for the right time to act. While we were there, the man started telling me stories about that road. He said many drivers have reported similar sightings over the years. Some disappeared without traces. Others were found in a state of shock, muttering on a black pickup truck. "This road has been the scene of many fatal accidents," he continued. "They say the truck has been driven by a driver who died here for decades, but still wandering the highways looking for new victims." I could barely breathe as I heard those words. Every second it looked like an eternity, and my mind was full of frightening images. I knew this was not a coincidence. That thing had chosen me for some reason. When the first ray of the sun appeared on the horizon, the truck disappeared. The man explained to me that this road was known for fatal accidents involving a black pickup truck. They said it was driven by a driver who died in an accident for decades, but was still wandering the roads looking for new victims. Since that night, I have never returned to B322. Whenever I need to make deliveries in Devon, I choose alternative routes, even if it means driving for more hours. But sometimes, when I'm driving on other roads at night, I see something through the corner of my eye. An old black pickup truck with erased headlights following me. If you have crossed something similar on the UK roads, leave your comment below. Have you ever been chased by something inexplicable? Subscribe to the channel so as not to lose the next reports, and share this video with your friends. Maybe they also have something to tell.